Hey, while I was on vacation last month, I had the opportunity to do something really nostalgic. And if anybody knows, I can be pretty sentimental. But Lisa and I were in Pacific Beach actually riding our bikes. This was before I had that accident where I hurt my shoulder. And we happened to cross this street in Pacific Beach, Loring Street, that I used to run up when I was on the crew team in UC San Diego, and I had not been on this street for 36 years. And you can bet what I did. I had to run up that street, really steep, and we would run up that street over and over again for training. And so I got off my bike and I sprinted as fast as I could to the top of this street. And the unofficial finish line of the street was a stop sign. And you can imagine, I really felt the burn. I was huffing and puffing all the way. I managed to get up the street a couple of times. We used to do it at least 12 times. And wow, what a great memory that was to get to the top of the hill, to see the incredible view up there as you look out and you can see Mission Beach sprawled out and La Jolla on one side and the ocean. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful view. Anyway, um, as I was thinking about running up to the top of the hill and getting to the finish line up there, I was thinking again about where we are in the midst of this pandemic and the fact that we're not at the finish line yet, and everything else that has gone with it. But I think we're starting to see at least, or being able to imagine crossing that finish line within this next year. And it brought to mind actually some words that Jesus spoke as his disciples, were approaching a real tribulation that would eventually end in the destruction of Jerusalem, but also in his death and his departure from this world. And so he was trying to prepare his disciples for a time of tribulation, but also to give them hope. And as he was talking about this in the temple in Luke chapter 21, his disciples asked him, well, when is all this going to be? And what will be the signs that this is about to take place? And as Jesus is talking about his coming death as well as the destruction of the temple, he explains to his disciples what it will mean to finish well, to reach the top of the hill, to cross the finish line. And his words are really excellent advice for what we're going through right now. And the first thing he says is, be careful who you listen to. In Luke chapter 21, he says, beware that you are not led astray, because many leaders are going to show up with forged identities, claiming I'm the one, or the end is near. Don't fall for any of that, Jesus says. There's just something about human nature that is drawn toward those who claim to have all the answers. Have you noticed that? And the election year is of course prime time for that. And I want to say, beware of those who overpromise. Beware of claims that any one leader or any party or cause is owed the allegiance that you and I owe to Christ alone in our minds and our hearts. Beware that you are not led astray, says Jesus. And secondly, stay calm. When you hear of wars and insurrections and great earthquakes and famines and plagues, Jesus says, don't be terrified, for these things must take place, he says, but the end, and here he's speaking of Jerusalem's destruction, will not follow immediately. And again, I'm thinking in response to this pandemic and a race to find the vaccine, and thinking about the emotional and the economic strain of the safer at home orders and the wildfires now across our state and the hurricanes in the Gulf and all the anti-racism protests that are happening, the opportunistic looting and rioting that has also unfortunately taken place. And if that wasn't enough, a divisive presidential election running in the background, Jesus says to us, stay calm. Keep your head and don't panic. Because uncontrolled fear and panic and paranoia and scapegoating and hatred, these are the signs of the enemy at work. And we really have to resist it as God's people. And you know, a little humor doesn't hurt either. My dad used to say to me with a smile after I had a bad test score or failed my driver's license test the first time or had some kind of a relationship problem, he would say, Steve, remember, it's not the end of the world. And he would smile at me and get me to smile. It's not the end of the world. And you know, in Christ, let's face it, in Christ who raises the dead and makes all things new, this is always true. It's not the end of the world. And we can trust him, even when the world seems like it's falling apart. So staying calm as God's people is so important, but then we must also remain compassionate. There was a gym friend of mine that once remarked to me during a particularly violent news week that he could hear Jesus warning in his head from Matthew's gospel that in the last days the love of many will grow cold. You know, it's been falsely taught that we should not be too quick to fix the world's disasters, that we shouldn't be too quick to work for peace or stand up for social justice or for those who are being hurt or mistreated, or try to basically fix problems in this world. Because if we do that, if we try to make the world a better place, we're just going to end up delaying Christ's return. Wow, that's just bad theology. Can I just say that? It denies Jesus' own call to be peacemakers, or to love our enemies, or to give to those in need. Just go back and read the Sermon on the Mount. Because Jesus' kingdom is advancing right now, my friends, through you and me. And we're supposed to be part of that, just as he said we would be. And finally, Jesus says, say something. Don't stay quiet. For in that hour, I will give you the words and the wisdom to be my witnesses. You know, in the midst of a crisis, Jesus promises not just to bless our words, he promises to give us his words. And I want you to think about what that means, to speak Jesus' words, to speak his blessed words. Speaking always begins with listening, or at least it should. Because if we can win the right to be heard by sincerely listening to those with whom we may have some really deep disagreements, we may then have the opportunity to speak about Jesus with humility. Jesus was talking about a situation in which his disciples would have to speak in response to the accusations of those who would try to destroy the movement of Christ. And that implied having to listen. Sometimes listening can be really tough. Sometimes we have to listen to those with whom we really disagree. But Jesus wants us to be ready to speak when we have the opportunity. I'll be honest. I'm concerned about the potential divisiveness of the next few months as we run up to the election for our own church. And so I want to ask you to take a simple test. Before you say anything to anyone or write anything to anyone, ask yourself this: can I imagine Jesus saying these words to that person? We also have pretty good imaginations, and I probably can imagine Jesus saying all kinds of things. Let's also maybe ask this question: would I want Jesus to say these words to me? So let's face it, we're still in the midst of tribulation. It's true. Which means we need to be careful who we listen to. We need to stay calm. We need to keep a sense of humor. We need to be compassionate. We need to be prepared to speak words that Jesus would and could say.
And I want to speak a blessing over you today, that by God's grace, you and I will make it all the way to that finish line. It may not look pretty, like when I tried to run up that hill after 36 years and just about ready to fall flat on my face, out of breath, but we're going to make it. And that's something else to think about today.
Whoa, how far I got, how much I kicked my butt. Used to do that 10 times. Look at the view though. Crazy view. Who'd ever think I'd be back here 36 years later? Finally.